So I focus very much on helping to ensure that people with disability are appropriately treated. Ultimately, I look at one thing and one thing only. I look at everything from a human rights perspective. I have a right to access these services just as much as you have a right to access those services. The fact that I have a disability should not disadvantage my right. The fact that I'm in prison should not disadvantage my right. I still maintain my human rights of being able to do that.
That's very powerful. I think those three layers are very, very, very deep and meaningful, and work across all the layers. And how this purpose has evolved when you were working in organizations and your decision-making process, because you can't have, you can't live your life all the time, and because there'll be crossroads when you have to take a decision of, what you choose first, and how these positions of dilemma came to you, and then, some scenarios if you want to discuss.
I think that, there's some very, very complex issues in the disability space, for example, and at a workplace, one of the things that, and when we were writing the state disability strategy, one of the main areas that we came across was the fact that people with disability are severely disadvantaged in two areas. It's the income levels and the education levels. So if we focused on trying to address those things, what we're trying to do is to make sure that education is accessible to everyone. So we've worked very closely when we were designing the strategy. We worked very closely with government to remove all TAFE fees in Western Australia so that people with disability can access those, so that they're not going to be disadvantaged by education. I would hope that one day the universities also go to the same process and actually allow for some, removal of fees. And we go back to, the Whitlam era when we had no fees for education and so on. That's one. And then the other part of it was in regard to income. It was about employment. And what we needed to do was to ensure that every organization, every corporation, every public service department, one had a quota of people that they would employ who were people with disabilities. So we encourage that. So we try and make sure that organizations actually do have a quota where they say, we will represent X% of our population as being people with disabilities, because that's the level of disability out in the community.
Yeah.
We're working towards that. The Public Service Commission has agreed to come on board, and they have a 5% level. 5% is inordinately low, and I'll keep working with government to increase that up to 23%, which is the level of disability out there in the community. But the only way you're going to do that is to redesign your workplace so that you can accommodate, you make what is called reasonable adjustment to a workplace to accommodate people's disabilities. So, classic example, someone who comes in and works for an ISP that we are very familiar with in WA. What that ISP makes sure is that this person with quite marked autism levels is not on the phones.
Yeah.
Because that's only going to stress them out further.
Yeah.
I've worked very closely with the people at Crown Casino. They've taken on a significant employment number of people with disabilities. But they've got access to rooms there where people with disability in the workplace can go and have a rest every hour. So every hour they're allowed to go and have a rest for 15 minutes. So you adjust your workplace, and you come back to what we were discussing earlier, that what you should be looking at is the outcomes and not the processes and the amount of time you spend there. So that's what you can do. And we found that invariably when in the employment space, when you have people with disability, absenteeism is significantly lower.
Yeah.
And the turnover of staff is significantly lower because people stay on.